Welcome back to Lena's Romantasy Collection, where the alphas are possessive and the furniture might just bite back. Quick roll call for the pack before we dive into today's chaos. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments and drop a cat emoji if you have a pet that thinks they are the real alpha of your house. Today we have a special one. It's hilarious, it's steamy, and it involves a very tired antique restorer, a kleptomaniac cat, and an alpha king who gets mistaken for an ottoman. But before we start, if you want to support the channel and get early access to stories like this, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the lights on and the romance loud. Now, check your seat before you sit down. The king is waiting. Let's read. Chapter 1. The air inside the Gilded Lily was not merely hot. It was aggressively stifling, heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the desperate ambition of Viridia Bay's social elite. Stella Morrow adjusted the strap of her small beaded clutch, her feet throbbing in heels that were lovely to look at, but structurally designed by a sadist. She wasn't here for the champagne or the gossip. She was here because Mrs. Vanderhoven needed an appraisal on an antique settee, and apparently, business could only be conducted amidst a cacophony of violins and polite laughter. "Just 10 minutes," Stella whispered to herself, slipping away from the main ballroom. 10 minutes of silence, or I'm going to start charging double. She navigated the gilded corridors, looking for a place to hide. She found a heavy oak door slightly ajar at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Checking over her shoulder to ensure no one was following her with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, she slipped inside and pressed the door shut until it clicked. The room was pitch black. The silence was absolute, a blissful, heavy blanket that instantly soothed her frazzled nerves. It smelled clean in here, like rain hitting dry earth and deep, rich pine, a sharp contrast to the cloying florals of the ballroom. Stella didn't bother looking for a light switch. She just needed to sit. Her eyes adjusted poorly to the gloom, but she made out the silhouette of a large, high-backed armchair in the far corner. It looked massive, promising soft velvet and relief. With a groan of pure exhaustion, Stella marched over, turned around, and dropped her entire weight onto the seat. It was not soft. The surface beneath her was firm, radiating a startling amount of heat. Before her brain could process the textural inconsistency, why was the upholstery hard? The chair moved. Large, strong hands clamped onto her waist, halting her scramble to escape. A chest expanded against her back, and a low, vibrating rumble resonated through her spine, making her freeze. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was organic, predatory. "Don't move," a voice commanded from the darkness. It was deep, rough like gravel crunching under heavy tires, and laced with a terrifying authority. "Tell me what you want." The vibration of his growl traveled straight through her dress, spiking a heat in her belly that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with biology. Stella's heart hammered against her ribs, but her survival instinct, honed by years of navigating difficult clients and a treacherous ex-alpha, kicked in. Panic would get her killed. Wit might buy her time. She didn't scream. Instead, she went rigid, her hands hovering in the air. "Honestly," Stella said, her voice trembling only slightly, "I want to take these heels off, and I would kill for a cheeseburger. Are you a genie or a very uncomfortable ottoman?" The grip on her waist tightened, the fingers digging in slightly, not to hurt, but to anchor. The breathing behind her ear hitched, as if the chair was surprised. "You sat on me," the voice stated, the aggression slipping into genuine confusion. "You were lurking in the dark," Stella countered, her heart still racing. "In my defense, You are the size of a love seat. Who hides in the dark at a gala? Someone who wants peace, he grumbled. Well, Stella said, realizing she was still straddling a stranger's lap in the dark. This is awkward. Can I get up, or are you going to eat me? That depends, the man whispered, his nose brushing the sensitive skin of her neck, inhaling sharply. You smell like honeysuckle. Before she could respond to the abrupt observation, the door she had just closed flew open. A beam of light from the hallway sliced through the darkness, hitting a switch on the wall. The overhead crystal chandelier flooded the room with blinding, incandescent light. Chapter 2. Stella blinked rapidly against the sudden brightness, instinctively raising a hand to shield her eyes. When her vision cleared, the situation went from awkward to catastrophic. She wasn't sitting on a bench. She was perched squarely on the lap of a man who looked like he could bench press her vintage Fiat. He was wearing a tuxedo that strained at the shoulders, his dark hair messy as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes, steel gray and dilated, that made the air leave her lungs. King Byron Valerius, the alpha of the Summit Pack, the most powerful wolf in the city, and she was using him as a chair. "Secure the king!" a voice roared. Harlan, the king's head of security, charged into the room, followed immediately by 3 other massive guards. They filled the small VIP lounge instantly, sucking the oxygen out of the space. Weapons were drawn, not guns, but tactical batons, though Stella knew they didn't need them. Their claws were lethal enough. "Contact!" Harlan barked, his eyes shifting to Amber. "Get away from him!" Stella tried to scramble up, but Byron's hands were still on her waist, holding her in place. For a terrifying second, she thought he was using her as a human shield. "Stand down," Byron ordered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the floorboards vibrate. The guards froze, but they didn't lower their stance. They formed a semicircle around the chair, barely 5 feet away, creating a wall of muscle and hostility. This wasn't just a security detail. It was a cage. "She breached the perimeter, Alpha," Harlan growled, stepping closer, his gaze locked on Stella like a laser. "She could be an assassin." "She's an antique restorer," Byron said, his tone dry. He finally loosened his grip on her waist, allowing Stella to stumble to her feet. She smoothed her dress, her face burning. "And she thinks I'm an ottoman." Stella cleared her throat, grabbing her beaded clutch like it was a shield. "Your Highness," she stammered, offering a jerky nod. The room was dark. You were very still. Logic dictated furniture." Byron looked up at her. In the light, he looked exhausted. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and his jaw was set in a permanent line of tension. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "You should have checked for a pulse before sitting, miss." Byron trailed off, waiting. "Morrow, Stella Morrow," she supplied, resisting the urge to take off her shoes and run. "Miss Morrow," Harlan interrupted, stepping between them. He was an older wolf, graying at the temples, with the bedside manner of a brick wall. "You will come with us for questioning. No one enters the king's radius without clearance." "Harlan, stop," Byron sighed, rubbing his temples. "She didn't know I was here. I turned the lights off." "To evade your detail, sir," Harlan pointed out sharply, "which is a violation of Protocol 7 Alpha. If we hadn't tracked your phone's GPS to this room—" "I wanted 5 minutes," Byron snapped, a flash of anger igniting in his gray eyes. 5 minutes without someone breathing down my neck." "And now you have a strange woman sitting on your lap," Harlan countered, unbothered by the king's temper. "Safety is not optional, sir." Stella watched the dynamic, fascinated despite her fear. The Alpha King, the most feared predator in Viridia Bay, was essentially being grounded by his babysitter. "I'm just going to go," Stella said, pointing a manicured thumb toward the door. "I have a settee to appraise. Enjoy your safety." She took a step toward the door, but the 3 guards shifted in unison, blocking her path without touching her. They were like a synchronized wall of tuxedo-clad granite. "Nobody leaves until the area is cleared," Harlan stated. Just then, the distinct, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a cane echoed from the hallway. Byron's face went pale. The guards flinched. "Oh no," Byron whispered. "The cavalry." Chapter 3. Grandma Rose did not walk. She arrived. The 80-year-old matriarch of the Valerius line swept into the room, her silver hair coiffed into an indestructible helmet of elegance. She wore a gown that was obscenely expensive, and she wielded an ebony cane with a silver wolf head handle like a scepter. She stopped in the doorway, surveying the crowded room. 4 tense guards, 1 exasperated Alpha King, and Stella, who was trying to merge with the wallpaper. "Byron," Rose said, her voice sharp and clear. "Lady Clementine has been waiting by the chocolate fountain for 20 minutes. She is wearing a dress made entirely of eco-friendly silk, and she wants to discuss wolf politics. Why are you hiding in a broom closet?" "It's a VIP lounge, grandmother," Byron corrected, standing up. He towered over everyone, but he hunched slightly around his grandmother, a subconscious attempt to make himself smaller. "It's a hiding spot," Rose declared, poking Harlan in the shin with her cane. "Move, Harlan. You're blocking the feng shui." Harlan grunted but stepped aside. Rose's sharp eyes landed on Stella. She looked Stella up and down, analyzing the paint stain on her hem, which Stella had hoped looked like an artistic pattern, and the messy chestnut hair held up by a forgotten pencil. "Who is this?" Rose asked, pointing the cane at Stella. "Is she the reason you're avoiding Lady Clementine?" The room went silent. Harlan looked ready to arrest Stella for existing. Byron looked from his grandmother to the guards, then to Stella. He looked like a trapped animal chewing off its own leg. "Yes," Byron blurted out. Stella's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" Byron stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He grabbed Stella's hand, his palm warm and calloused. "Grandmother, this is Stella. She's my girlfriend." Harlan choked on air. The guards broke their stoic formation, exchanging confused glances. "Girlfriend?" Rose raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Since when?" "You haven't dated anyone since the invention of the smartphone." "It's new," Byron lied, his thumb rubbing the back of Stella's hand nervously. "Very new. We wanted to keep it private, to avoid the media." "And the layout of the room necessitated her sitting on your lap?" Rose asked dryly. "We were having a moment," Byron said, his ears turning red. Stella realized she had 2 choices: deny it and be detained by Harlan for trespassing, or play along and potentially escape. She looked at Byron. His eyes were pleading, a silent SOS from one tired soul to another. She squeezed his hand back. "It's true," Stella said, forcing a bright customer service smile. "He's obsessed with me. I keep telling him to focus on his kingly duties, but he just follows me around like a lost puppy." Byron stiffened but didn't correct her. Rose narrowed her eyes. She walked up to Stella, sniffing the air delicately. "She smells like sawdust and honeysuckle, not exactly royal perfume." "I work for a living," Stella said, keeping her chin up. "It keeps the ego in check." Rose stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then, a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. Finally, someone with a spine. Harlan, stand down. Byron, bring her to dinner on Friday. Don't be late. Rose tapped her cane on the floor, turned, and marched out. Lady Clementine can talk to the chocolate fountain. As soon as she was gone, Byron dropped Stella's hand like it was hot coal. He exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding since birth. I am so sorry, he said, running a hand down his face. You owe me, Stella said, crossing her arms. Big time. And I don't accept apologies. I accept cash or checks. I can do better than cash, Byron said, looking at her with a sudden, calculating intensity. You restore furniture, right? I have a proposal. Chapter 4. 2 days later, Second Chances, Stella's shop, was peaceful. The smell of wood glue and lemon oil filled the air, and the only sound was the rhythmic scratching of sandpaper against mahogany. Stella was on her knees, working on the claw foot of a Victorian table. She wore her denim overalls, her leather tool belt strapped to her waist, and her hair was in its usual chaotic bun. Pass me the grit, she muttered to the empty room. Meow, replied Sally from atop a bookshelf. The ginger munchkin cat stared down judgmentally, her tail flicking. Don't give me that look, Stella told the cat. We have bills to pay. If the king actually shows up, you behave. No stealing. Sally yawned, unimpressed. At exactly 10 a.m., the sunlight streaming through the front window was blocked. 3 black armored SUVs pulled up to the curb, effectively shutting down the narrow street. Subtle, Stella muttered, standing up and wiping her hands on a rag. The shop door chimed. Harlan entered first, scanning the small space with suspicion. He checked the corners, glared at a grandfather clock, and then nodded to the door. Byron walked in. He looked ridiculously out of place. His tailored charcoal suit seemed outrageously expensive. He had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the hanging brass lamps. Behind him, 2 more guards squeezed in, making the shop feel like a clown car of muscles. Your Highness, Stella said, leaning against her workbench. Welcome to my humble empire. Watch out for the varnish, it sticks. Byron looked around, his eyes tracing the shelves of restored chairs and partially stripped dressers. He seemed to relax slightly, inhaling the scent of wood and work. It's quiet here, he noted, his voice low. It was, Stella pointed out, eyeing the guards who were now inspecting a vase. Until you brought the militia. Do they have to be here? Yes, Harlan and Byron said in unison. Byron sighed. Stella, about the other night. I need this ruse to continue. My grandmother is relentless. If she thinks I'm unavailable, she'll stop ambushing me with suitors. And what do I get? Stella asked. Aside from the thrill of being interrogated by the Secret Service every time we go out. Byron reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it on the workbench. The Summit Pack House has a library. It was built in 1920. It contains over 50 pieces of original furniture. Desks, rolling ladders, armchairs. They are falling apart. The council wants to buy new ones. Stella gasped softly. She knew that library. It was legendary among restorers. They want to replace 1920s craftsmanship with modern junk? I want to save them, Byron said, locking eyes with her. But I need a master restorer, someone I trust to be in the pack house for months. You trust me? Stella asked, skeptical. You met me 2 days ago while I was sitting on your lap. I trust that you didn't scream, Byron said. And I trust that you aren't afraid of my grandmother. That is a rare quality. He pushed the folder toward her. The contract is yours. Exclusive rights, full budget. In exchange, you attend 4 events with me as my girlfriend and keep Rose off my back. Stella opened the folder. The budget number made her dizzy. It was enough to pay off the shop's mortgage and fix the Fiat starter. "Deal," Stella said, extending a hand covered in sawdust. Byron didn't hesitate. He took her rough hand in his. "Deal." From the top shelf, Sally let out a war cry and launched herself. She didn't aim for Byron. She aimed for Harlan. The Munchkin cat landed on the head of security's shoulder, snatched his earpiece with her teeth, and leaped to the floor, scrambling under a dresser. "My comms!" Harlan shouted, dropping to his knees to chase the cat. Byron watched his terrifying head of security fighting a 5-pound cat with short legs. A small, genuine smile tugged at the corner of the king's mouth. "I think," Byron said, looking at Stella, "this is going to be interesting." Chapter 5. "It's gone," Harlan growled, his face pressed against the dusty floorboards of Stella's shop. "The cat ate my tactical comms." "She didn't eat it," Stella said, stepping over the head of security's legs to grab a cardboard box. "She stashed it. Sally is a collector, not a consumer. Check your shoes before you leave." Harlan stood up, dusting off his pristine suit knees with an expression of profound irritation. He looked at Byron, who was leaning against the counter, watching the chaos with a faint, amused smirk. "Sir, we need to extract," Harlan stated, abandoning the search for his earpiece. "The perimeter is compromised by clutter." "We're not leaving until Stella is packed," Byron said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Grandmother insisted she stays at the penthouse for the season." "Proximity breeds credibility," she said. Stella sighed, looking around her shop. "I can't just leave second chances. Who's going to water my succulents? Who's going to explain to Mrs. Higgins that her ottoman isn't ready?" "My assistant Lena has already rescheduled your appointments," Byron said, checking his watch. "And we have a watering service." "Of course you do," Stella muttered. She grabbed her leather tool belt, the heavy weight of it reassuring against her hip. She tossed a few essentials into a duffel bag: heavy wool socks, 3 oversized t-shirts, her favorite varnish scraper, and a bag of gummy bears. Then came the hard part. "Sally," Stella called out sweetly. "Here, kitty kitty." From atop the highest shelf, 2 green eyes narrowed. Sally knew what the travel carrier meant. It meant prison. "I need backup," Stella told the room. It took 3 royal guards, Harlan, and a laser pointer to corner the ginger munchkin. Finally, Stella managed to scoop up the hissing bundle of fur and deposit her into the carrier. Sally let out a yowl that sounded like a demon being exorcised. "Is it safe?" one of the guards asked, eyeing the carrier warily. "She smells fear," Stella warned. She handed the carrier to the guard. "Don't shake her. She gets motion sickness." They moved to the street. The convoy of black SUVs looked ridiculous parked in front of her peeling storefront. "What about Pistachio?" Stella asked, pointing to her mint green Fiat 500. "I'm not leaving my baby." Harlan looked at the tiny, round car with disdain. "We will have it transported." "No towing," Stella insisted. "She's vintage. The suspension is delicate." Harlan pinched the bridge of his nose. He pointed a thick finger at the youngest, largest guard. "Rook, you drive the bean." Rook, a man the size of a refrigerator, looked at the Fiat with genuine terror. "Sir, I don't think I'll fit." "Make it work," Harlan ordered. 10 minutes later, the convoy rolled out. Stella sat in the back of the lead SUV next to Byron, watching through the tinted rear window as Rook tried to navigate her Fiat. His knees were practically against the windshield. "He looks like a bear in a tricycle," Stella noted. "He's a trained killer," Byron said softly, looking at her. "He'll figure it out." The interior of the SUV was luxurious, smelling of leather and Byron. a scent of deep forest pine and something electric that made her skin prickle. She shifted away from him, acutely aware of the fake contract resting between them on the seat. "Welcome to the pack, Stella," Byron said. He didn't smile, but his gray eyes were warmer than she had ever seen them. Chapter 6. The Summit. Pack. Penthouse was not a home. It was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking Viridia Bay. The floors were marble, the furniture was angular and uncomfortable, and the silence was absolute. At 7 a.m., Byron sat at the head of a dining table long enough to land a plane on. He was trying to drink his espresso. 5 feet away, Harlan stood at attention, reading from a tablet. 2 guards stood by the elevator. Another was stationed on the balcony. "The Eastern Territory reports a fluctuation in unauthorized border crossings," Harlan recited. "And Lady Clementine has sent another gift basket. It contains organic venison jerky." "Burn it," Byron said, rubbing his temple. "The jerky, not the border report." "Sir, protocol dictates we log all gifts." The elevator chimed, cutting Harlan off. The doors slid open. Stella walked out. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt that said, "I sawdust, I conquered," and thick wool socks. Her hair was a bird's nest of tangles, and she was scratching her stomach absently. The guard stiffened. Harlan's hand twitched toward his weapon out of habit. Stella ignored them entirely. She shuffled past the wall of muscle, yawning widely. "Is there coffee, or do I have to kill someone?" Byron froze, his cup halfway to his mouth. He watched as she walked right up to him, breaching the 20-foot security radius, the 5-foot personal guard radius, and the "do not touch the king" unspoken rule. She grabbed the pot of coffee from the tray in front of him, poured herself a mug, and took a long, desperate sip. "Oh, sweet nectar," she moaned, eyes closing. The room was silent. The guards looked at Harlan. Harlan looked at Byron. Byron looked at Stella. "Good morning," Byron said, his voice sounding slightly strangled. Stella opened one eye. "Morning. Why are there so many people in your kitchen? It's too early for tuxedos." "They are my detail, Stella," Byron said gently. "They are always here." "Well, tell them to stop staring," she muttered, grabbing a piece of toast from his plate. "It's creepy." She turned and shuffled back toward the hallway, the socks sliding on the marble. "I'm going to find Sally. If she's eaten the Fabergé egg, just put it on my tab." She disappeared around the corner. Harlan stared at the empty space where she had been. Then he looked at the king. "Sir," Harlan said stiffly, "she took your toast." "I know," Byron said. He picked up his cup, hiding a smile that threatened to break his stoic mask. "Let it go, Harlan." For the first time in years, the penthouse didn't feel like a museum. It felt lived in. And the chaos was surprisingly welcome. Chapter 7. By noon, the penthouse garage, usually reserved for armored SUVs and Byron's untouched motorcycle, had been transformed. Stella had claimed a corner bay. Drop cloths covered the pristine epoxy floor. Her tools were laid out with surgical precision on a portable workbench she had insisted on bringing. The air, usually smelling of exhaust and tire shine, now carried the sharp, clean scent of varnish stripper and sawdust. Byron stood in the doorway watching. He had told Harlan he was coming down to inspect the security of the perimeter, but that was a lie. He just wanted to see her. Stella was bent over a 1920s mahogany library chair, wearing her overalls and safety goggles. She was sanding the armrest with a rhythmic, focused intensity. Her arms were dusted with fine wood powder, the muscles flexing as she worked. "You're staring!" she called out over the sound of the sanding. Byron stepped inside, waving his guards back. They hesitated, but stayed at the threshold. "I'm observing," Byron corrected. "It's my chair." Stella stopped sanding and pushed her goggles up into her messy hair. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dust. It was your chair. Now it's my patient. This poor thing has been neglected. The varnish is cracked and the joints are loose. Did someone throw it across a room? Byron flinched slightly. My father. He had a temper. Stella's expression softened. She ran a hand over the wood as if soothing the object. Well, we're going to fix it. Wood has a memory, Byron, but it also forgives. You strip away the damage, sand down the rough spots, and the grain is still good underneath. Byron walked closer, drawn by her voice. She spoke about furniture with more empathy than most people spoke about their families. You're good at this, he said quietly. I like things that can be fixed, Stella shrugged. People are messy. Politics is exhausting. But a chair? A chair just wants to support you. It's honest work. She picked up a screwdriver. Hand me that clamp. Byron blinked. He looked at the clamp on the bench. He was the Alpha King. People handed him things. He didn't fetch. But he reached out, grabbed the metal clamp, and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. A spark, literal static, or perhaps something biological, snapped between them. Stella didn't pull away. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. Thanks, Your Highness. Byron, he corrected hoarsely. Just Byron when we're down here. Okay, Byron. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd given him that wasn't for the benefit of a camera or his grandmother. Now hold this leg steady. Don't wobble. For the next hour, the king of the summit pack knelt on a drop cloth, holding a chair leg while an Omega scolded him for moving too much. And for an hour, the weight of the crown felt a little lighter. Chapter 8. The peace didn't last. 2 days later, Stella returned to the penthouse after a supply run to a specialty hardware store in the lower district. She walked into the living room carrying a heavy bag of brass fittings, humming a tune. Byron was on the sofa, reviewing documents with Lena, his assistant. He looked up as she entered, a greeting forming on his lips. Then he stopped. His nostrils flared. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the gray irises. A low, menacing growl started deep in his chest, vibrating through the room like an approaching earthquake. Lena froze, dropping her tablet. The guards at the door unholstered their batons, scanning for a threat. Sir? Harlan barked. Byron didn't answer. He stood up, moving with a fluid, lethal grace that was pure wolf. He crossed the room in 3 strides, looming over Stella. Stella dropped her bag. The brass fittings clattered loudly on the marble. Whoa, personal space? Byron grabbed her shoulders. He wasn't hurting her, but his grip was iron. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling violently. Who is he? Byron snarled against her skin. Stella blinked, confused. Who is who? The male, Byron growled, pulling back to look at her. His face was contorted with a primal, ugly jealousy that made him look terrifying. You smell like another wolf, a male, unmarked. Stella sniffed her own shoulder. She smelled like traffic and the hardware store. Then she remembered. Oh, she said, realizing. The guy at the counter, Stan. He helped me carry the brass to the car. He touched you, Byron accused, the growl getting louder. The sound was triggering the guards. The air in the room was thick with aggression. He handed me a box, Byron, Stella said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't cower. She didn't bare her throat. She looked him dead in the eye. He's 70 years old and has a bad hip. I think your kingdom is safe from Stan the hardware guy. I don't like it, Byron stated, his wolf pacing just beneath his skin. I want his name. No, Stella said flatly. She placed her hands on his chest and pushed. He didn't budge an inch, but the gesture surprised him enough to silence the growl. I am a grown woman running a business, Stella said. I interact with people, males, females, and delivery drivers. You don't get to growl at me because I bought screws. We have a contract, remember? Fake girlfriend, not property. The word fake hit Byron like a bucket of ice water. He blinked, the silver fading from his eyes as the man regained control. He looked at his hands on her shoulders, then at the terrified expression on Lena's face. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. The shame was immediate. Byron stammered. I apologize. The scent, it caught me off guard. Clearly, Stella said, adjusting her overalls. She bent down and picked up her bag of fittings. Go take a cold shower, Your Highness. You're shedding pheromones all over the rug. She walked past him toward the garage, but as she turned the corner, she touched the spot on her neck where his nose had brushed. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't fear. God help her. It wasn't fear. Chapter 9. I have a problem, Stella announced, standing in the middle of the penthouse living room. She was wearing her I Sawdust, I Conquered t-shirt and holding up a pair of heavy wool socks. My formal wear consists of safety goggles and a pair of boots that have permanent varnish stains. Unless the dress code for Grandma Rose's dinner is lumberjack chic, we aren't going. Byron, who was currently being briefed by Harlan on the security protocol for the restaurant, which involved securing the kitchen staff and a perimeter check of the wine cellar, looked up. He was already dressed in a dark navy suit that fit his broad shoulders with terrifying precision. Grandmother anticipated this, Byron said, signaling to Lena. Lena, the sharp-eyed assistant, snapped her fingers. 2 staff members rolled in a clothing rack laden with silk, velvet, and chiffon. She sent options, Lena said efficiently, and a stylist, and a jeweler, and a notary for some reason. An hour later, Stella stood in front of the full-length mirror. She hardly recognized herself. The dress was a deep emerald green, Tier 3 vocabulary, verdant and lustrous, that clung to her curves before flaring out at the knee. It was backless, exposing the faint scars from wood splinters on her shoulders, badges of her trade. You clean up well, Byron said from the doorway. He had stopped there, his hand resting on the frame, staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Don't get used to it, Stella deflected, smoothing the fabric. I feel like a sausage in a very expensive casing. The dinner was held at the Obsidian Orchid, a restaurant where the water menu had its own sommelier. The moment they entered, the atmosphere shifted. The room was filled with Viridia Bay's elite, high alphas, wealthy merchants, and socialites who had spent centuries perfecting the art of the judgmental stare. Grandma Rose sat at the head of a private table, her silver-headed cane resting against her chair like a weapon. You're late, Rose said as they approached. I was about to order the appetizers without you. Traffic, Byron lied smoothly, pulling out Stella's chair. As they sat, Harlan and 3 guards positioned themselves along the back wall, their eyes scanning the room like surveillance cameras. It made eating soup incredibly awkward. The trouble started during the second course. A woman with hair the color of platinum and a smile that didn't reach her eyes leaned across the table. It was Lady Clementine. So, Stella, Clementine purred. Byron tells us you work in... repair? Restoration, Stella corrected, picking up her wine glass. She noticed Clementine's eyes dart to her hands. Despite the manicure Lena had forced on her, Stella's hands were rough. There was a callus on her thumb from sanding, and a faint, permanent stain of walnut dye on her index finger. "How quaint," Clementine said, loud enough for the table to hear. "It must be so grounding to work with your hands, like a laborer." A few guests tittered. The air grew heavy. Byron's jaw tightened, the fork in his hand bending slightly under the pressure. Stella placed her glass down. She was about to deliver a retort about how Clementine's family fortune was built on sweat she had never shed, but Byron moved first. He reached out, took Stella's rough, calloused hand in his, and lifted it. He didn't hide the imperfections. He brought her knuckles to his lips and kissed them, lingering over the callus on her thumb. "These hands," Byron said, his voice deep and carrying to the back of the room, "restore history. They save things that others are too lazy to appreciate. I find them intoxicating." The silence that followed was absolute. Clementine turned a shade of pink that matched the salmon. Grandma Rose took a sip of her wine, her eyes twinkling. "Well played," she whispered. Chapter 10. The next morning, the sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Byron woke up with a start. The room was bright, too bright. He looked at the digital clock on the wall. 10:15 a.m. Panic surged through him. He had a council meeting at 9 a.m. His internal clock was usually flawless, but he relied on his phone alarm for backup. He reached for the nightstand where he always left his secure, encrypted device. It was empty. "Harlan!" Byron roared, throwing the covers off. The bedroom door burst open. Harlan entered, weapon drawn, expecting an assassin. "Secure the room!" Harlan barked to the hallway. "Where's the threat?" "My phone!" Byron shouted, searching under the pillows. "It's gone. It has the nuclear codes. Well, the pack codes. And my schedule." "We swept the room last night, sir," Harlan said, lowering his weapon but looking confused. "No one entered." "Then where is it?" They tore the room apart. They checked under the bed, in the bathroom, and even in the pockets of his discarded suit. Nothing. Byron stormed out into the living room, wearing only sweatpants, his chest heaving. "Stella!" Stella was on the balcony, drinking coffee and reading a book on 18th century joinery. She looked up, unbothered by the frantic Alpha King. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," she said. "My phone is missing," Byron accused. "Did you take it?" "Why would I want your phone?" Stella asked. "I have my own. It has a cracked screen and fewer government secrets." "Then where—" A muffled vibration interrupted him. Bzz, bzz. Byron froze. He turned his head, his enhanced hearing pinpointing the sound. It wasn't coming from the table. It was coming from the floor. Specifically, from inside one of Stella's knee-high leather boots that she had left by the door. He walked over and reached into the boot. He pulled out his sleek, black phone. "Why is my phone in your shoe?" Byron asked, holding it up. "I didn't put it there," Stella said, suppressing a smile. "Meow." They both looked down. Sally, the ginger munchkin cat, was sitting behind the boot. She looked at Byron, blinked slowly, and then swatted at his ankle. "She has a hoarding problem," Stella explained, taking a sip of coffee. "She likes shiny things. Your phone case is glossy. She probably dragged it there while you were sleeping." Byron stared at the cat. The cat stared at the king. This tiny, short-legged creature had breached the most secure room in the city, stolen a device containing state secrets, and hidden it in a shoe. Byron started to laugh. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a deep, rusty sound that seemed to surprise even him. "She breached the perimeter," Byron wheezed, looking at Harlan, who stood in the doorway looking mortified. Your security was defeated by a cat with short legs." "I hate that animal," Harlan muttered. Chapter 11. By Saturday night, the tension in the penthouse was palpable. Byron had spent 12 hours in meetings and the walls were closing in. He stood by the window, watching the city lights, looking like a prisoner in his own tower. Stella walked up behind him. She was wearing jeans and a leather jacket. "You look like you need to hit something," she noted. "I need to run," Byron admitted. "But if I go for a run, I have to take a convoy. It defeats the purpose." "Then let's not take the convoy," Stella said, dangling a set of keys. "Pistachio's in the garage. She's small, she's quiet, and Harlan is currently in the West Wing yelling at the laundry staff about starch levels." Byron looked at the keys. He looked at the guards stationed at the elevator. "How?" he whispered. "Service elevator," Stella winked, and bribed the maintenance guy with a restored stool. "We have 5 minutes." They moved like teenagers sneaking out past curfew. They took the stairs down 2 flights to bypass the main guard post, then slipped into the service elevator. When they reached the garage, they didn't take the armored SUV. They squeezed into the mint green Fiat 500. Byron had to tilt his head to fit. His knees were practically touching his chin. "This is undignified," Byron grumbled as the engine sputtered to life. "This is freedom," Stella corrected, peeling out of the garage before the gate fully closed. They drove to Neon Nights, a retro arcade on the edge of the city. It was loud, chaotic, and smelled of popcorn and static-free electricity. No one looked at them. To the kids playing pinball, Byron was just a tall guy in a tight t-shirt, not a king. Stella dragged him to the air hockey table. "I bet you $10 I can beat you," Stella challenged, sliding a quarter into the slot. "I have superhuman reflexes," Byron reminded her, picking up a mallet. "This is unfair to you." "Less talking, more playing, Your Highness." The game was brutal. Byron was fast, but Stella was vicious. She banked shots off the walls, feinted left, and scored while he was distracted by her laugh. They played for an hour, sweating, shouting insults, and completely forgetting the world outside. When Stella scored the winning point, she threw her hands up. "Victory! Pay up, wolf boy!" Byron leaned across the table, grinning. He was breathless, his hair messy, his eyes bright. "Double or nothing on skee-ball?" "You're on," Stella said. She looked at him then, really looked at him. The weight on his shoulders was gone. He looked younger, lighter. And for the first time, Stella realized that the fluttering in her chest wasn't just adrenaline. She wanted to keep him like this, happy. "Byron," she said softly. He froze, sensing the shift in her tone. The air between them charged with a sudden incandescent tension. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Found them!" a voice roared. Chapter 12. The Spell Shattered. Harlan stood at the entrance of the arcade, looking apocalyptic. Behind him were 6 guards, effectively blocking the exit. The music in the arcade seemed to stop as the patrons noticed the wall of muscle that had just arrived. "Secure the target!" Harlan barked. 2 guards rushed forward, flanking Byron. Harlan marched up to them, his face purple with rage. He ignored Stella and got right in Byron's face. "You disappeared," Harlan hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "We had tactical units spinning up. We thought you were taken. Do you have any idea the resources we just wasted because you wanted to play games?" He gestured wildly at the air hockey table. "We were safe, Harlan," Byron said, his voice dropping to that cold alpha register. "Back off." "No," Harlan snapped, crossing a line he had never crossed before. "You don't get to decide that. You are the king. You are an asset of the state. You do not get to run off in a toy car with a civilian because you're bored. You put the entire pack at risk." He turned his glare on Stella. "And you are a liability. I should have your contract terminated and you removed from the city for reckless endangerment." "Hey!" Stella stepped forward, anger flaring. "Don't talk to me like I'm a suspect. He's a grown man, not a nuclear warhead." "He is the crown," Harlan shouted. "And you are nothing but a distraction." "Enough!" The roar was so loud it rattled the glass on the pinball machines. Byron stepped in front of Stella, shoving Harlan back a full 3 feet with a single hand. The force was effortless, a reminder of the power gap between a guard and a king. "You will not speak to her that way," Byron growled, his eyes flashing silver. "And you will not speak to me like I am a prisoner." The arcade went deathly silent. "I am the Alpha," Byron said, his voice low and dangerous. "I choose where I go. I choose who I am with. And tonight, I chose to be a man, not a monument. If you cannot respect that, Harlan, then you can hand in your badge." Harlan stared at him, shock replacing the anger. He had raised Byron. He had never seen him defend a personal desire so violently. Harlan looked at Stella, who was standing behind Byron, her hand resting tentatively on the king's back. He saw the way Byron shielded her, not out of duty, but out of instinct. Harlan exhaled, the fight draining out of him. He straightened his tie. "The car is waiting, sir," Harlan said stiffly. "We will escort you back. In the SUV." Byron didn't move for a second. Then he nodded. He turned to Stella, his hand finding hers. "Let's go," Byron said softly. "I think the game is over." They walked out together, the entourage forming a protective, suffocating ring around them. But this time, Byron didn't let go of her hand. Chapter 13. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. Not the comfortable silence of the arcade, but a heavy, suffocating quiet. Harlan sat in the front passenger seat, radiating disapproval. Byron and Stella sat in the back, separated by 6 inches of leather that felt like a canyon. When they arrived, Byron went straight to his study. Stella went to her room, exhausted. The adrenaline crash was brutal. She kicked off her boots, hung her leather jacket over the chair, and crawled into the massive bed without changing out of her jeans. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't kind. The dream started as it always did, the smell of burning oak, the sound of glass shattering. She was back in her old pack house, the Riverstone territory. Her former alpha, a man with a smile like a shark, was standing over her father's workbench. "It's just business, Stella," he said, holding the deed to her family's land. "I traded it, the land for the Alliance. You can stay, of course, as a servant." Stella tried to scream, to fight, but her feet were stuck in drying varnish. The room began to shrink. The walls, lined with her father's tools, closed in. The alpha laughed, a sound that morphed into the growl of a wolf. "You have no value," he sneered. "Just a worker bee without a hive." Stella jolted awake, a gasp tearing from her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her skin was cold and clammy. Thump, thump, thump. It took her a moment to realize the sound wasn't her heart. It was a soft, rhythmic knocking on her bedroom door. "Stella?" Byron's voice was low, muffled by the heavy wood. She scrambled to sit up, wiping the sweat from her forehead. I'm okay." The door handle turned but didn't open. "Your heart rate spiked to 140, Byron said through the door. "I heard it from the hall." Stella wrapped her arms around her knees. Of course he heard it. Alpha senses. Just a bad dream. Go back to sleep, Byron. I can't, he admitted. The scent of distress. It's strong. Stella hesitated. She hated being vulnerable. She hated needing comfort. But the darkness of the room felt oppressive. She got up and opened the door. Byron stood there. He had changed into gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. His hair was messy and his feet were bare. He looked less like a king and more like a man who was just as lonely as she was. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked, leaking against the doorframe but careful not to cross the threshold. "No," Stella said honestly. "I want to forget it." Byron nodded. He didn't push. He didn't offer platitudes. "Come with me." He led her not to the living room, but to the kitchen. He opened the massive stainless steel fridge and pulled out a carton of milk and a bottle of chocolate syrup. "My grandmother says chocolate fixes everything," Byron said, pouring 2 glasses. "It's scientifically unproven, but I'm not arguing with her." Stella took the glass. The cold, sweet liquid grounded her. They stood in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the appliance displays. "It was about my old alpha," Stella whispered, staring into her glass. "He sold my family out, made me feel small. Tonight, with Harlan yelling, it just brought it back." Byron set his glass down. He moved closer, entering her personal space slowly, giving her time to back away. She didn't. "Harlan was wrong," Byron said, his voice fierce. "You aren't small, Stella. You're the only person who has ever looked at me and seen a man, not a title. That makes you giant." Chapter 14. The next morning, the peace of the chocolate milk summit was shattered by a digital explosion. Stella walked into the living room to find Harlan pacing. He wasn't wearing his earpiece, the replacement one, and he looked like he had chewed through a brick. Lena was typing furiously on 3 different tablets. "Don't look at the news," Byron said immediately from the sofa. Naturally, Stella pulled out her phone. Her cracked screen lit up with notifications. "The King's Pauper? New royal girlfriend revealed as debt-ridden laborer. Exclusive. Stella Morrow's financial records leaked." Stella tapped the article. Her stomach dropped. There, in high definition, were photos of her bank statements, the mortgage on Second Chances, the loan she took out for the Fiat's transmission repair, the overdue notice for her supplier account. "They posted my credit score," Stella whispered, horrified. "It's 620. That's private." "It's a smear campaign," Harlan said, stopping his pacing. "Orchestrated by the Obsidian Claws. They want to paint the king as weak for choosing a mate who is financially unstable." "Unstable?" Stella snapped, her face heating up. "I pay my bills. Eventually. This is humiliating." "It gets worse," Mina said, hesitating. "The article claims you are a gold digger, that you targeted the king at the gala to save your failing business." Stella dropped her phone on the couch. She felt dirty. The narrative was perfect. The poor, desperate Omega trapping the wealthy Alpha. It erased her work, her pride, her integrity. She looked at Byron. He wasn't looking at the tablet, he was looking at her, his expression unreadable. "You knew," Stella said, her voice trembling. "You knew I was struggling." "I knew you had a mortgage," Byron said quietly. "I didn't know the extent." "This contract," Stella said, gesturing to the room. "The restoration job. Everyone will think it's a handout, charity for the king's pet." "It's not charity," Byron argued, standing up. "You are the best restorer in the city." "It doesn't matter," Stella yelled, tears stinging her eyes. "Perception is reality, Byron. You know that better than anyone. I can't do this. I can't be your liability." She turned to Harlan. Draft the termination papers. I'm breaking the contract. I'll leave the penthouse today. Stella, wait! Byron reached for her. No, she said, backing away. You need a queen, Byron, or at least someone whose bank account doesn't look like a crime scene. I'm just a girl with a toolbox and a cat. She turned and ran to her room, slamming the door. Chapter 15. Byron stood in the silence of the living room. The slam of Stella's door echoed like a gunshot. Lena, Byron said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Get me the publisher of the Viridia Herald on the phone. Sir, Harlan interrupted, if she leaves, the scandal dies down. It might be strategically... Byron turned on him. The wolf surfaced, turning his eyes a brilliant, molten silver. If she leaves, I burn this city to the ground. Harlan closed his mouth. He nodded once. Lena, get the publisher, Byron repeated, and get my legal team. I want that article scrubbed. I want the server it's hosted on bought and dismantled. I want the journalist sued for breach of privacy, defamation, and emotional distress. And her debt? Lena asked, typing rapidly. Pay it, Byron ordered. Sir, Harlan warned, that confirms the gold digger narrative. Byron paused. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. Harlan was right. If he paid her debts, he proved the tabloids right. Stella would hate him for it. She was too proud. She wanted to earn her way, not be rescued. Don't pay it, Byron corrected, clenching his fists. Buy the debt, anonymously. Transfer it to a holding company under the crown. Freeze the interest. Give her unlimited time to pay it back. She never has to know it's me. Done, Lena said. Byron walked to Stella's door. He didn't knock. He leaned his forehead against the wood. He could smell her salt tears and the sharp, metallic tang of anxiety. Stella, he said through the door. Open the door. Go away, came the muffled reply. I'm not letting you go, Byron said. Read the contract. Clause 14, Section B. Early termination requires mutual consent. I do not consent. The door flew open. Stella stood there, eyes red, holding a half-packed duffel bag. Sally was sitting in the bag, looking annoyed. You're trapping me? Stella demanded. I'm holding you to your word, Byron said, stepping into her space. You promised to fix my library. The chairs are waiting. The rolling ladders are broken. You don't quit a job halfway, Stella Morrow. That's not who you are. He was gambling, appealing to her professional pride instead of her heart. Stella stared at him. She sniffed, wiping her nose on her sleeve. You're a jerk. I'm a king, Byron corrected. And I have a lot of broken furniture. Are you going to fix it, or are you going to let the tabloids win? Stella looked at the bag. She looked at Sally. She looked at Byron. Fine, she grumbled, dropping the bag. But I'm charging you overtime for emotional distress. Chapter 16. 3 days later, the scandal had shifted from a roar to a simmer, mostly because Byron's legal team had threatened to sue anyone who retweeted the article. Stella channeled her rage into her work. The library of the pack house was a cathedral of books, with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves and a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. She was currently perched at the top of a 20-foot rolling ladder, polishing the brass rail. The ladder was old and creaky, but she trusted her balance. Byron sat at a desk far below, pretending to read a report on grain imports. In reality, he was watching Stella. The way she stretched to reach the high spots, the way her tongue poked out between her lips when she concentrated. You're staring again, Stella called down, her voice echoing in the vast room. I'm supervising, Byron replied, Yuen in his chair. It's my rail. It's shiny enough to see your reflection, Stella said. I can see you smirking from here. She locked the wheels of the ladder and began to descend. Halfway down, the heel of her boot caught on a loose rung. Tier 3 vocab, precarious and rotted. Crack! The wood gave way. Stella gasped, her hands flailing for a grip that wasn't there. She fell backward, plummeting 10 feet toward the hardwood floor. She didn't hit the floor. She hit Byron. He had moved with a speed that blurred the air, catching her in mid-fall. His arms wrapped around her waist and shoulders, absorbing the impact as he went down on one knee to steady them. Stella clung to his lapels, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. She was breathless, staring up into his eyes. They were wide, dark, and filled with a terror she had never seen before. I got you, Byron rasped, his voice shaking. I got you. They stayed like that for a long moment. The library was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. The air between them was thick, heavy with incandescent tension. Stella realized she was straddling him again, just like the first night, but this time it wasn't dark. She could see every detail of his face, the worry lines, the flecks of silver in his irises, the slight parting of his lips. You're making a habit of falling on me, Byron whispered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. You make a good landing pad, Stella breathed. He didn't let go. His hand moved up her back, tangling in her hair. He pulled her fractionally closer. Stella didn't resist. She leaned in, her gaze dropping to his mouth. The door to the library creaked open. Sir, Harlan's voice cut through the moment like a knife. We have a situation at the docks. It's the Obsidian Claws. Byron squeezed his eyes shut for a second, a look of pure agony crossing his face. He released Stella slowly, setting her on her feet. Duty calls, Byron said, his voice flat. But as he turned to leave, he brushed his knuckles against her cheek. Stay inside, Stella. Please. He walked out, the king once more. Stella stood alone in the library, touching her cheek, the phantom heat of his skin lingering like a brand. Chapter 17. Harlan's interruption in the library didn't just break the moment, it shattered the atmosphere like a dropped vase. Byron had pulled away, his face hardening into the mask of the king, leaving Stella standing next to the broken ladder, with her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. I have to go, Byron said, already moving toward the door. Harlan, secure the perimeter. No one enters or leaves the pack house. Byron? Stella called out, taking a step forward. Is it bad? He paused, his hand on the heavy brass doorknob. He looked back at her, and for a split second, the mask slipped. It's politics, Stella. Boring and loud. Fix the ladder. I'll be back for dinner. He lied. Stella knew the scent of a lie. It smelled like sour milk. But she nodded, watching the heavy oak door close with a definitive click. 2 hours later, Byron was not at the docks. He was in his grandmother's private solar, pacing a hole in her Persian rug. Sit down, boy, Grandma Rose commanded. She was drinking tea from a delicate porcelain cup, her silver-headed cane resting against her knee. You're making me dizzy, and you're shedding pheromones of distress all over my begonias. Harlan says the obsidian claws were spotted near the warehouse district, Byron said, running a hand through his hair. They're testing the boundaries, trying to provoke a response. And you're worried they'll target the girl, Rose stated calmly. Byron stopped pacing. He stared out the window at the sprawling gardens of the estate. She's a civilian, grandmother. She has no pack, no training. If Stephen finds out she's important, he'll use her. Important? Rose raised an eyebrow. I thought she was a contract employee, a fake girlfriend to keep me off your back. Byron turned to look at her. His steel-gray eyes were dark with a mixture of fear and resignation. It's not fake. Not anymore. I tried to keep it professional, but today, she fell off a ladder. And when I caught her, I didn't think about the liability insurance. I thought about how the world would end if she hit the floor. Rose set her cup down. So, you found your rib. My what? Your missing rib, Rose said, tapping her chest. The old stories say an alpha is born with a hollow space in his chest, a structural weakness. He can build armies and empires, but he will always be on the verge of collapse until he finds the piece that holds him up. She's your structural integrity, Byron. She's a liability, Byron argued, his voice cracking. She's stubborn, she drives a car the size of a toaster, and she has a cat that steals government property. She's not a queen. She's chaos. And you are a tomb, Rose countered. You need a little chaos. But if you're asking for my permission to claim her, you don't need it. You need to ask her. I can't, Byron whispered. If I claim her, I put a target on her back. Stephen will come for her. Then you have a choice, Rose said, picking up her cane. Push her away and keep her safe, or pull her close and teach her to bite. But don't leave her in the middle, Byron. That's where people get hurt. Chapter 18. The docks of Viridia Bay were a maze of shipping containers and rusting cranes, smelling of salt, diesel, and rotting fish. It was neutral ground, theoretically. In practice, it was a powder keg. Byron arrived in the armored SUV flanked by two other vehicles. Harlan was in the passenger seat, checking the load on his sidearm. Intel put Stephen at Warehouse 4, Harlan reported. He's meeting with suppliers, possibly weapons. Or worse, silver. We go in to talk, Byron ordered, stepping out of the vehicle. The wind whipped his coat around his legs. No shifting unless they shift first. They moved through the shadows of the containers. The air was thick with tension. Byron's senses were dialed to 11. He could hear the scuttle of rats, the lap of water against the pier, and the heavy, rhythmic heartbeats of the men waiting for them. Warehouse 4's sliding door was open. Inside, under the buzz of flickering halogen lights, stood a group of men. In the center was Stephen, the alpha of the Obsidian Claws. Stephen was everything Byron wasn't: flashy, loud, and cruel. He wore a white suit that remained impossibly clean in the grime of the docks, and he smiled with too many teeth. "King Byron!" Stephen called out, spreading his arms. "To what do I owe the honor? Did you come to inspect the calamari?" "I came to tell you to pull your men back," Byron said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You're encroaching on Summit territory. The warehouse district is under my protection." "Protection is such a strong word," Stephen sneered, stepping forward. "I prefer management. Your pack has grown soft, Byron. You spend your time at galas and restoring old furniture. I hear you even hired a little Omega to polish your wood." Byron went still. The mention of Stella was a calculated strike. "Leave her out of this," Byron warned, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "Oh, I intend to," Stephen laughed. He signaled to one of his men, who tossed a heavy folder onto a crate. "But the press is so fascinated by her. The debt, the tiny car, the vulnerability. It would be a shame if she had an accident. Workshops are dangerous places. Saws slip, ladders break." Byron lunged. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was instinct. He covered the 20 feet between them in a blur, slamming Stephen against a stack of crates. The Obsidian guards drew weapons, and the Summit guards responded instantly, a dozen gun barrels leveling at each other. "You threaten her again," Byron snarled, his forearm pressing against Stephen's throat. "And I will tear your throat out with my teeth." Stephen didn't struggle. He just smiled, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "And there it is, the weakness. You care about the pet. Thank you for confirming it, Your Highness." Stephen shoved Byron back. He straightened his white lapel. "Go home, Byron. Go check on your little restorer. You never know when a loose screw might cause a tragedy." Byron stared at him, his chest heaving. He wanted to kill him, right here. But if he did, it would start a war that would burn the city down. "Pull out," Byron ordered his men, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. He turned and walked away, but the seed of terror had been planted. Stephen knew, and Stephen would use her. Chapter 19. Byron stormed into the penthouse like a hurricane. He didn't greet the guards. He didn't check in with Lena. He marched straight to the guest wing. Stella was in the kitchen feeding Sally a piece of high-grade salmon. She looked up, a smile forming on her face when she saw him. "You're back," she said. "I fixed the ladder. Well, I clamped it. It needs a new rung, but—" "Pack your bags," Byron interrupted. Stella froze. The piece of salmon dropped from her fingers. Sally pounced on it immediately. "What?" "Pack your bags," Byron repeated, his voice cold and devoid of the warmth she had seen in the library. "The contract is terminated. You're leaving." Stella wiped her hands on a dish towel, her brow furrowing. "Byron, what are you talking about? Did something happen at the docks? Harlan said—" "I don't care what Harlan said," Byron snapped. He couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he would crumble. He had to be the monster to save her. "I'm done. The restoration is taking too long. The press is a nightmare. I can't have a liability living in my house." "A liability?" Stella stepped around the island, approaching him. 3 days ago, you said I was the only one who saw you as a man. In the library, you said, "I said what I had to say to keep you working," Byron lied. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "It was a strategy. But now the cost outweighs the benefit. Harlan was right. You're a distraction." Stella stopped. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "So that's it? I'm just a line item on a spreadsheet? You kiss my hand at dinner, you hold me when I fall, and then you fire me because the math doesn't work?" "Yes," Byron said. He turned his back to her, staring at the blank wall. "Lena has prepared a severance package. It will cover your debt and the shop. Take the money and go back to your life, Stella." "I don't want your money," Stella whispered. Her voice was shaking. I thought we were building something, not just furniture." "You were wrong," Byron said harshly. "Get your cat. The driver is waiting." He heard her intake of breath. He waited for her to yell, to throw something, to fight. "Fine," Stella said. Her voice was quiet, broken. "I'll go. But don't you dare send me a check. I earned every dime I made here." He heard her footsteps retreat down the hall. He heard the zipper of the duffel bag. He heard the carrier door snap shut on a protesting Sally. And then he heard the front door close. Byron sank to the floor, putting his head in his hands. He let out a roar of anguish that shook the glass walls of the penthouse, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. "It's for her own good," he whispered to the empty room. "She's safe now." He was wrong. Chapter 20. Stella didn't take the SUV. She refused the driver Byron had offered. She called a rideshare, loaded her duffel bag and Sally's carrier into the back of a dented sedan, and gave the driver the address of Second Chances. It was raining when she arrived at her shop. The street was dark. The streetlights reflected in the puddles like oil slicks. Thanks, she muttered to the driver, hauling her gear out. She unlocked the front door of the shop. The bell chimed, a cheerful sound that felt mocking now. The air inside was stale. It smelled of dust and neglect. "Home sweet home, Sal," Stella said, letting the cat out. Sally didn't run. She stood by the door, her fur bristling. She let out a low, guttural growl. Stella paused, her hand on the light switch. "What is it, girl?" Then she smelled it. Not lemon oil, not sawdust. It smelled of burnt copper and wet dog. The back door of the shop, which she always double-locked, was standing ajar. Stella dropped her keys. She turned to run, but a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the display corner. "Going somewhere, darling?" a voice purred. A man stepped into the faint light of the street lamp filtering through the window. He wore a white suit that was damp from the rain. He had a smile that was all teeth. Stephen. "You must be the famous Stella," Stephen said, stepping over a restored ottoman. "Byron has terrible taste in furniture, but I see why he likes you. You have spirit." "Get out," Stella said, reaching for the nearest weapon, a heavy brass candlestick on the counter. "Feisty," Stephen laughed. "But I'm afraid your king isn't here to catch you this time. He sent you away." How tragic. He thought if he broke your heart, he'd save your life. 2 more men emerged from the back room. They were massive, their eyes glowing with the shift. "Grab her," Stephen ordered, "and bring the cat. I hate leaving witnesses." Stella didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She threw the candlestick. It hit the first guard square in the nose with a satisfying crunch. "Run, Sally!" Stella shouted. She vaulted over the counter, scrambling for the back exit. But she was an omega against 3 alphas. A hand grabbed her ankle, yanking her back. She hit the floor hard, the breath leaving her lungs. "Don't damage the merchandise," Stephen tutted, looming over her. "We need her pretty for the ransom video." Darkness rushed in as a heavy boot connected with her temple. The last thing Stella saw was Sally diving under a cabinet, her green eyes glowing in the dark. Chapter 21. The Summit. Penthouse was silent, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. Byron sat in the dark living room, staring at the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling glass. He held a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. Every instinct in his body was screaming, a high-pitched, static whine in his blood that usually meant imminent violence. He told himself it was just the severance of the bond, the phantom pain of pushing Stella away. "Sir," Harlan said, stepping into the room. "The legal team has finalized the purchase of her debt. The paperwork is filed." Byron didn't answer. He just watched the lightning fork over the city. Suddenly, a sharp screech of feedback cut through the room. Harlan winced, clapping a hand to his ear. He pulled his current earpiece out, tapping it frantically against his palm. "What is that?" Byron demanded, the glass in his hand cracking under the pressure of his grip. "Interference," Harlan muttered, adjusting the frequency. "It sounds like... Wait. That's my old comms channel. The secure line." "You lost that unit," Byron said, standing up. The hair on his arm stood up. "You lost it at the shop." Harlan went pale. He pressed the earpiece back in, turning up the volume on his tablet, which monitored the squad frequencies. "The unit has been activated. Someone is transmitting." Byron moved to the console, leaning over Harlan's shoulder. Through the static, sounds filtered into the penthouse. The crash of breaking wood, the heavy thud of boots on floorboards, then a sharp crunch of plastic being crushed under a heel cut through the feed, followed by a voice close to the microphone. "Check the back room," the voice growled, distorted by the transmission. Stephen wants anything that smells like the king. Byron's heart stopped. Then it restarted with the force of a pile driver. The girl is secure, another voice reported. She's out cold, taking her to the ironworks. Then, a distinct, terrified sound cut through the feed. Meow. And a hiss. Sally, Byron whispered. The name was a prayer and a curse. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't saved her. He had sent her alone, defenseless, into a war zone. He had stripped her of his protection and handed her to the wolves. The whiskey glass in his hand shattered, shards raining onto the expensive rug. Blood welled in his palm, but he didn't feel it. Mobilize, Byron ordered. The command wasn't human. It was pure alpha. It shook the windows. Mobilize everything. The guard, the reserve units. I want every wolf in the city moving toward the ironworks. Sir, Harlan said, already drawing his weapon. The ironworks is Obsidian territory. This is an act of war. No, Byron snarled, his eyes bleeding into a glowing molten silver. This isn't war. This is an extermination. He turned and sprinted for the elevator, not waiting for the doors to open fully before prying them apart with his bare hands. The entourage scrambled to keep up, but the king was already gone. Chapter 22. The old ironworks was a rusted skeleton of industry on the far edge of the docks, a maze of corroded catwalks and smelting vats that had been cold for 50 years. The rain hammered down on the corrugated metal roofs, creating a deafening drumbeat that masked the approach of death. Byron didn't wait for the armored SUV to stop. He kicked the door open while the vehicle was still moving, rolling onto the wet asphalt and coming up in a sprint. "Secure the perimeter!" Harlan barked into his comms, leading a squad of 6 guards toward the east entrance. "Don't let them move her!" Byron didn't care about perimeters. He could smell her. Beneath the stench of rust and the damp rot of the river, he smelled rain on dry earth and honeysuckle. And blood. The scent of her blood drove him mad. He hit the main doors of the foundry. They were chained shut. Byron didn't slow down. He slammed his shoulder into the metal, the impact buckling the steel. With a roar, he tore the chains from their housing, the metal shrieking in protest. He burst into the main cavern. High above, on a suspended catwalk, Stephen stood holding a flare. Beside him, tied to a chair lashed to the rusted railing of the walkway, was Stella. She was slumped forward, her chin on her chest. A dark bruise bloomed on a temple, violet and angry against her pale skin. She wasn't moving. "Welcome, Your Highness!" Stephen shouted, his voice bouncing off the metal walls. "You made good time. I barely had time to set the mood." "Let her go," Byron growled, stalking forward. His suit was soaked, plastering to his frame. His hands were claws, his nails elongating. "I don't think I will," Stephen smiled. "You see, you embarrassed me, Byron. You came to my docks and threatened me. Now, I'm going to watch you bleed." Stephen snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the machinery, 24 wolves emerged. They didn't shift fully. They were in that hybrid state of aggression, eyes glowing, teeth bared, muscles bunching. "Kill him," Stephen ordered. Byron didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for Harlan. He didn't wait for backup. He launched himself at the first wave of attackers. He moved with a brutality that was terrifying to witness. He caught the first attacker by the throat, slamming him into a concrete pillar with enough force to crack the masonry. He ducked a claw swipe from the second, spinning and delivering a kick that shattered ribs. But there were too many of them. They swarmed him, a tide of violence. Byron fought like a demon, but he was one king against an army. Up on the catwalk, Stella stirred. The noise, the roars, the breaking bones penetrated the fog of her concussion. She lifted her head, wincing at the sharp spike of pain behind her eyes. She blinked, her vision swimming. She saw the chaos below. She saw the dark figure in the center of the swarm, fighting to reach her. "Byron," she croaked. Chapter 23. The pain in Stella's head was blinding, a white-hot spike that throbbed with every heartbeat. But the sight of Byron falling to one knee, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, cleared the fog instantly. He was going to die. He was going to die because he came back for her. "No," Stella whispered. She pulled against the ropes binding her wrists to the chair. They were coarse hemp, digging into her skin. She looked around. She needed a tool, a lever, anything. Her eyes landed on a rusted metal shard protruding from the catwalk railing near her elbow. It was jagged, sharp. She leaned sideways, jamming the rope against the metal edge. She sawed frantically, ignoring the friction burn on her wrists. Below, Byron roared, a sound of pain that tore through her soul. Snap! The rope gave way. Stella ripped her hands free, untying her ankles with trembling fingers. She stood up, swaying slightly. "Hey!" Stephen shouted, realizing his prisoner was loose. He started running toward her along the catwalk. Stella didn't run away. She looked down at the 20-foot drop to the concrete floor where Byron was being overwhelmed. She took a breath. It smelled of rust and violence. "Accountability, Stephen," she muttered. She kicked off her heavy boots. She closed her eyes and pulled on the thread of instincts she had ignored for years. The shift was agonizing, bones cracking, muscles reshaping, fur bursting through skin. But it was fast. In midair, Stella vanished. In her place, a sleek, honey-gold wolf plummeted toward the fight. She didn't land gracefully. She crashed into the back of a massive gray wolf that was about to bite Byron's neck. Her jaws clamped onto the attacker's hamstring, and she yanked with all her weight. The wolf howled, collapsing. Byron spun around, his eyes wild. He saw the golden wolf standing over the fallen enemy, teeth bared, hackles raised. She was small compared to the combatants, but she was fast, vicious, and utterly fearless. Stella. The recognition hit him like a lightning bolt. She hadn't run. She had joined the fight. Byron threw his head back and roared, shifting in a seamless explosion of black fur and muscle. The Alpha King stood revealed, a massive, midnight black beast, twice the size of the others. The dynamic of the fight changed instantly. They were no longer a king and a victim. They were a pack of two. The golden wolf wove between the legs of the attackers, biting ankles and distracting them, creating openings. The black wolf capitalized on every mistake, his massive jaws crushing bones and tossing enemies aside like rag dolls. They moved in perfect synchronization, a dance of violence and protection. Stephen, watching from the catwalk, turned pale. He turned to run, but the door behind him burst open. Harlan stood there, wet, angry, and holding a very large gun. "Sit down," Harlan barked. Chapter 24. The foundry fell silent, save for the heavy panting of wolves and the drip of rain through the leaking roof. The floor was littered with groaning bodies of the obsidian claws. In the center of the carnage, 2 wolves stood side by side. The massive black wolf nudged the smaller golden one with his snout, checking for injuries. The golden wolf leaned into him, shivering slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. Harlan walked down the metal stairs, dragging a cuffed and sullen Stephen behind him. The entourage secured the room, zip-tying the remaining conscious enemies. "Clear," Harlan announced. He looked at the wolves. "You need to shift back. The medic is 5 minutes out." The black wolf looked at Harlan, then trotted behind a large industrial press. The golden wolf followed. A few moments later, Byron emerged. He had found a tarp to wrap around his waist, though his chest was bare, covered in scratches and bruising. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. He reached back behind the machine and helped Stella out. She was wrapped in Harlan's spare trench coat, which swallowed her small frame. Her hair was matted with sweat, and the bruise on her temple was darkening nastily. She swayed, and Byron scooped her up into his arms without a word. "Is it over?" Stella asked, her voice raspy. "For now," Byron said, looking at Stephen, who was being shoved into a waiting transport vehicle. "We won." "My boots," Stella murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. "I left my boots on the catwalk." Byron let out a short, incredulous laugh. He pressed a kiss to the top of her messy head. "I will buy you 1,000 boots. I will buy you a shoe factory." "Just the boots," she mumbled, her eyes closing. "And maybe a cheeseburger." Harlan approached them. He looked at the unconscious Obsidian members, then at the king holding the restorer. He saw the way Byron looked at her, like she was the only valuable thing in a room full of scrap metal. "Sir," Harlan said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The SUV is ready. We retrieved the cat from the shop. She is displeased, but safe." "Good," Byron said. "Take us home." The ride back was different. There was no silence. Byron held Stella in his lap the entire way, refusing to put her in a seat. He kept one hand on her pulse, needing the constant reassurance of her heartbeat. Stella drifted in and out of consciousness, safe in the circle of his warmth. She didn't dream of her old alpha or burning houses. She dreamed of a library, a broken ladder, and a man who caught her when she fell. When they reached the penthouse, Byron carried her straight to the master bedroom. He laid her on the sheets, tucking the duvet around her. "Stay," she whispered, grabbing his hand as he tried to pull away. "I'm not going anywhere," Byron promised. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching over her like a gargoyle. "I'm right here." And for the first time in his life, the hollow space in his chest, the missing rib, didn't ache. It was full. Chapter 25. The silence in the master bedroom was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating quiet of the ironworks. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken. Stella sat on the edge of the massive bed, wrapped in a plush robe Byron had found for her. Her wrists were bandaged with white gauze, and an ice pack was pressed gingerly against her throbbing temple. She watched Byron as he paced the room. He was still shirtless, his chest a map of rapidly healing scratches and bruising from the fight. He stopped at the window, staring out at the pre-dawn city lights. "I thought I was saving you," Byron said, his voice rough. He didn't turn around. "When I terminated the contract, when I sent you away, I thought I was removing the target from your back. I was arrogant. I thought if I made you irrelevant to me, Stephen would lose interest." "You didn't make me irrelevant," Stella said softly, wincing as she shifted her position. "You made me vulnerable. You stripped my protection." Byron flinched. He turned to look at her, his steel gray eyes dark with guilt. "I know, and I will spend the rest of my life apologizing for it." "I don't want an apology," Stella said. She set the ice pack on the nightstand and stood up. Her legs were shaky, but she forced them to hold her weight. She walked across the room, closing the distance between them. "Then what do you want?" Byron asked, watching her warily, as if she were made of glass he had already cracked. "I want the truth," Stella said, stopping a foot away from him. She reached out, her bandaged fingers ghosting over a particularly nasty bruise on his ribs. Why did you really come back for me? You have an army, Byron. You could have sent Harlan. You could have sent a tactical team. But you came alone. You tore a steel door off its hinges. Byron looked down at her. He took her hand, careful of the bandages, and pressed it against his chest. His heart was beating a steady, powerful rhythm against her palm. Because the hollow space was screaming, he whispered. Because when I realized you were gone, the crown didn't matter. The city didn't matter. The only thing that made sense was the scent of honeysuckle and rain. He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. I didn't come for my employee, Stella. I came for my mate. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Mate. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a ruse for his grandmother. It was biology, soul and bone. You're an idiot, Stella murmured, a tear slipping down her cheek. You fired your mate. I'm a terrible boss, Byron agreed, a small, broken smile touching his lips. But I'm applying for a new position. Partner, protector, chair. Stella laughed, a wet, choked sound. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't tentative. It was acclaiming. She kissed him with all the fear and adrenaline of the last 24 hours, and he answered with a desperation that shook her to her core. Chapter 26. The sun hit the penthouse floor-to-ceiling windows at a sharp angle, painting the room in stripes of gold and shadow. Byron was already awake. He lay on his side, propped up on one elbow, watching Stella sleep. She was buried under the duvet, only her messy chestnut hair and one bandaged wrist visible. Her breathing was deep and even, the slow rhythm of recovery. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. The bruise on her temple had turned a mottled purple, a stark reminder of his failure. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, marveling at the reality of her here, safe, in his bed. Stella stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing warm, hazel eyes that were still glassy with sleep. Stop staring, she mumbled, her voice thick. It's creepy. I'm observing, Byron corrected, his voice a low rumble in his chest. I'm checking for concussion symptoms. My symptom is that I'm hungry, Stella said, stretching. She winced slightly as her muscles protested. And I feel like I fell off a building. You jumped off a catwalk, Byron reminded her. And then you bit a wolf twice your size. He had it coming, Stella yawned. She rolled onto her side, facing him. The sheet slipped, exposing her shoulder. Byron's gaze dropped, darkening with a sudden, intense heat. How is your head? He asked, his hand moving to cup the back of her neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. Better, she whispered. The air between them shifted, becoming thick and incandescent. Much better. Byron moved closer, his body shielding her from the light. He kissed the bruise on her temple with infinite tenderness, then moved down to her jaw, her throat. I'm going to take care of you, Stella. I'm going to rebuild everything I broke. Start with breakfast, she breathed, her hands tangling in his hair. Later, Byron growled against her skin. He pulled the duvet over them, shutting out the sun. The world outside could wait. The politics, the press, the grandmother, they were distant noise. In this bed, there was only the scent of rain, the warmth of skin, and the quiet, desperate worship of two people who had almost lost each other. Chapter 27. 2 hours later, the domestic tranquility was shattered by a sound that every cat owner knows and dreads. the distinct crash of something expensive hitting the floor. Stella bolted upright, clutching the sheet to her chest. Byron was out of bed in a second, shifting into a defensive stance, naked and ready to kill an intruder. "The living room," Byron barked. He grabbed a pair of sweatpants from the floor, pulling them on as he strode toward the door. Stella grabbed one of Byron's dress shirts. It hung to her knees, swallowing her frame, and followed him, ignoring the dizziness that swayed the room. They burst into the living room. It wasn't an assassin. It wasn't the obsidian claws. It was Sally. The ginger munchkin cat was sitting in the center of the Persian rug. She looked incredibly pleased with herself. Wrapped around her neck, dragging on the floor like a glittering leash, was a diamond necklace. And not just any necklace. The central stone was the size of a quail egg, surrounded by sapphires. "Is that?" Stella squinted. "Is that the royal crest?" Byron stared at the cat, then at the wall safe, which was standing wide open. The digital keypad was sparking slightly and blinking a red "system failure" code. "She shorted the lock," Byron whispered, horrified. "She must have chewed through the keypad wiring. It triggered the emergency release." "She has very sharp teeth," Stella offered helplessly. "And she's persistent." Sally stood up, shook herself, and began to drag the priceless heirloom toward the sofa. The diamonds clicked against the marble floor. Click, clack, click. "Sally, no!" Stella lunged, trying to intercept the theft. "Drop the crown jewels!" Byron ordered, using his alpha voice. Sally ignored both of them. She hissed at the king and pulled the necklace under the couch. Before Byron could dismantle the furniture to retrieve his heritage, the elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Grandma Rose walked in. She was followed by Harlan, who looked exhausted and was carrying a stack of legal files. Rose stopped. She took in the scene. The open safe, the king in sweatpants, the fake girlfriend wearing the king's shirt and nothing else, and the cat's tail twitching from under the sofa, surrounded by a faint glimmer of diamonds. Harlan covered his eyes. "I didn't see anything." Rose leaned on her cane. She looked at Stella, whose hair was a bird's nest and whose legs were bare. She looked at Byron, who was standing protectively in front of Stella, daring anyone to criticize her. A slow smile spread across the matriarch's face. "Well," Rose said, tapping her cane on the floor. "The safe was overdue for an upgrade anyway. And finally, Byron, you found someone with good taste in jewelry. Though I usually recommend wearing it, not dragging it under the sofa." "Grandmother," Byron started, his ears turning red, "this isn't what it looks like." "It looks like you're in love," Rose interrupted. "And it looks like I need to order a very small, very expensive collar for the cat. Don't be late for lunch." She turned and marched back into the elevator. "Come along, Harlan. Let the children play." Chapter 28. 3 months later. The late afternoon sun bathed the terrace of the pack house in warm, golden light. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and the sharp, clean scent of varnish. Stella was on her knees, working on the final piece of the library restoration project, a heavy oak throne that had been rotting in the basement for decades. She was wearing new boots, Doc Martens, a gift from Byron, broken in perfectly, and her favorite overalls. "Pass me the beeswax," she murmured, not looking up. A hand reached out, placing the tin of polish into her palm. Byron sat on the floor next to her. The king of the Summit Pack, the most powerful wolf in the region, was sitting cross-legged on the stone tiles holding a rag. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt covered in sawdust. "You missed a spot," Byron pointed out, gesturing to the armrest. "I didn't miss it," Stella corrected, dipping her rag into the wax. "I'm letting the wood breathe. You can't rush the finish, Byron. It has to cure." You're bossy, he noted, leaning back against her legs. I'm the expert, she replied, resting her hand on his shoulder. You're just the apprentice. It had been a busy 3 months. The trial of Stephen had been swift. The evidence of kidnapping and extortion was overwhelming. The scandal about Stella's debt had vanished the moment the palace released a statement confirming that Ms. Morrow was the official royal restorer and the king's intended mate. The tabloids had pivoted from gold digger to Cinderella with a sander. Stella looked out across the lawn. 50 feet away, a respectful, non-suffocating distance, Harlan stood by a tree. He was talking into his earpiece, but he wasn't glaring anymore. He gave Stella a small, stiff nod when he caught her eye. He's relaxing, Stella whispered. I think I saw him smile yesterday. Don't panic, Byron said lazily. It was probably gas. He turned his head, pressing a kiss to the denim of her overalls. Are you happy, Stella? Stella looked down at him. She looked at the restored chair, the peaceful garden, and the man who had torn the world apart to find her. The chair is fixed, she said, tapping the oak armrest. It's solid. It can hold the weight now. I'm not talking about the chair, Byron said softly. I know. Stella smiled, her eyes crinkling. She leaned down, kissing him, a slow, lingering promise. I'm happy. The structure is sound, Byron. No hollow spaces. From inside the house, a loud crash echoed. Meow! Byron sighed, resting his head back against her knee. She knocked over the Ming vase, didn't she? Probably, Stella laughed, picking up her rag. I can fix it. I can fix anything. I know, Byron said, closing his eyes, content. I know. The end. Quick favor! Don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Stella was brave for using the Alpha King as an ottoman, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear that disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is absolutely unhinged.